Just because you have an understanding of the Bible in your head doesn't necessarily mean that you have Jesus in your heart.
Get right, get inside, get hungry, got appetite. Everlasting water, never get thirsty. To disputed lands, take a journey.
You are listening to Chad SCHAFER on Disputed Lands.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, everyone, to Take on the World TV in another episode, the last episode of Disputed Lands for 2020. You all know by now that I took a pretty long break. I did a show a few weeks ago, but this one, thankfully, I got to get in before the end of this year. So from time to time, since the end of 2016, when I published my book, I've had the opportunity, and I've taken a lot of advantage. Every advantage I could to use my book as a bargaining chip to get a hold of other books that I really want to read. So that's been nice. I'm not going to be shy about that. I do use that to my advantage. I say, hey, that's a pretty good book. Let me send you one of mine if I can have one of yours. And most of the time, everybody's been pretty agreeable to that. So it's worked out pretty good for me. But then you have good friends, like my good friend Doug Hamp. We've really gotten to know each other over the last, I guess, 6 years now. 5 or 6 years, I've really gotten to know Doug. And there's some of his material that I really struggle reading, not because it's not good, but because he is so deep sometimes, and I'm so slow, it takes me a long time to digest. Of his works, the one book that I was able to just eat and consume from start to finish, it's my favorite one that he's done, is Corrupting the Image. And I had the opportunity, thankfully to him, to actually write a short, the word's going to escape me now. I get to write, he asked me to write a short bit at the beginning to endorsement. There's the word I was looking for, a short endorsement for this book, which I was happily and quickly latched hold of so that I can get a copy of this one sent to me as well. But to be a part of it in some small way is just, it's a grace given to me that I really don't take lightly. And thankfully, I get to not only give an endorsement, but I get to bring on Doug and do probably one of the first interviews, if not the first interview he's done for this book. It's not even out yet, Corrupting the Image 2. With that being said, I'm going to bring him on. Doug, hey, welcome to Disputed Lands.
Thank you for having me, Chad. It's great to be here.
Doug, your Corrupting the Image, as I already said, to me is groundbreaking. We heard bits and pieces from various other authors throwing around the idea of what corrupting the image was. We've, in various forms in their books. But what you did in Corrupting the Image 2 is you really broke it down and gave explanatory power to exactly what corrupting the image meant. And for that, I'm going to be forever grateful and thankful for that book, because it does really put in layman's terms for anybody who wants to pick it up and read what corrupting the image that the Bible speaks about, really is. It really gives us something to latch onto and puts it in understandable terms. And so it's my favorite book that you've written. I love it. Absolutely love it.
Thank you.
We're excited to talk about, you have now come out with its sequel, Corrupting the Image 2, which it carries on. Obviously, it's a sequel to this book, but it gives more, it's different in that it goes more into a description of just who is this one that has done the corrupting. And so with that, I'm going to let you go ahead and tell us then your thought process going from the first one and into this one.
Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, Corrupting the Image, number one, I called it Angels, Aliens, and the Antichrist Revealed. And I was showing that Satan has had an agenda to corrupt the image, right? That we were created in God's image. And if Satan could disrupt that, if he could, corrupt the image that God created us in, then perhaps God would not be able to send the Messiah. Jesus would not be able to come. And we know in Genesis 3:15 that it says that God says, I will cause enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. And so in Corrupting the Image 1, I talk all about that. I talk about what is the image. I talk about the genetics of the incarnation, which was absolutely fascinating. And then I got into a discussion of the Nephilim. And then lastly, I talked about what is happening in our days with the aliens. So, I wrote that 10 years ago. It's hard to believe.
I know.
That time has,
so
yeah. So, a lot has happened since then. In number 3, which I'm actually also working on, I will be talking about kind of the end game, right? When it'll take us up to the time of of Armageddon and the return of Jesus. And I'm totally excited about that because it's going to be a play-by-play type scenario where we are getting to see all of these things, and we're going to have zombies in there and all kinds of crazy stuff. But number 2, like what's up with number 2? There's really this missing history, and in order to get into what Revelation is talking about, I had to do a deep dive. I had to go all the way back as far as I could. In Revelation 17, it says that John says, I saw a woman riding on a beast. Right? And you're like, okay. And then this beast, it's the beast that was, is not, and will ascend out of the abyss and will go to perdition. What in the world is he talking about? Now, there have been many different perspectives on that. Some people have thought that that Babylon, the great Babylon the Great, is New York City. Others have thought it's the Vatican. And I would suggest that those are part of the problem, but they are not the problem itself. And I went back to ancient Sumer. So that's the ancient land of Shinar or Mesopotamia, the ancient Near East. And I found these symbols that we find in Revelation are there, right? There's an actual woman who's riding a beast. And so I had to dig in and say, okay, who is this woman? Who is the beast? What are the gods, the so-called gods, behind these things? And what it did is it really opened my eyes, and I hope it will open many people's eyes, that Satan has been trying to get world domination since the beginning. I mean, we know that, right? The Bible tells us that. But the question is, how has he been going about it? And probably one of the most challenging parts is that when you look in typical King James Bible, you might go to Isaiah 14 and it says, oh, Lucifer, how you have fallen. And you're like, okay, Lucifer. So then you start looking in the ancient literature for somebody named Lucifer. You find nothing. There's nothing there. But when you actually go back to the Hebrew, you discover it's not Lucifer, it's Hallel. That's the Hebrew there. And then the Hallel, I discovered, is related to Enlil. Enlil was an ancient god of Mesopotamia. He was called the Lord Wind. That's probably what Enlil actually means. It turns out it's the same word as the word for idols, Elilim, in the Hebrew. Elilim is Enlil. And so you start making all these connections, right? So when God says not to bow down to any graven image, he's like, don't bow down to Satan. Don't give your allegiance to him. But of course, Satan has been working on this, trying to get us to follow him. And I found some really exciting things. First of all, I start in the book and I look at why Satan would have done this. I look at who he was, what God gave him. Yeah.
So, please go into that for us in some detail, if you would, because the explanatory power behind this is necessary, because I think for any of us growing up as children, whether you went to church or not as a child, the image we get of just who Lucifer is probably skewed in many ways, both from what society and culture tells us the devil is, and incomplete descriptions that were given maybe in part or in pieces, should you have any description given to you in church. But you really break down all this description and give us a very clear image, if I should use that word, of just who this person is. So if you don't mind, could you go into that description, exactly what he did to corrupt himself?
Absolutely.
First?
Yeah. So there's really three principal places that we find big descriptions of Satan in the Bible. One, of course, is Genesis chapter 3. The other is Isaiah 14, and then Ezekiel 28. So I'll start with Ezekiel 28. That is, it says, "O son of man, bring a lamentation for the king of Tyre." So, if you maybe read some Bible commentaries and stuff, they'll say, well, the king of Tyre was probably, some king, right? Some earthly king. So this, may not be talking about Satan. And some people have misread this. And, it's one of those things you read, you're like, okay, I don't know what to do with that. But then you look at the descriptions of this anointed cherub. You're like, this isn't talking about a guy. This is talking about a spiritual being. And it says, you are perfect in all your ways. You were the standard of perfection. You were perfect in beauty. You were full of wisdom. What human king has those qualities? Nobody. And then what I did is I just kept going deeper into the research, and I found that the king of Tyre, that epithet or that title for this individual was actually Melkart. So Melkart is Melech Karat. Melech means king, Karat means city. So the king of the city is what this actually means. And that was a term for an ancient god, quote unquote God. And this ancient god was a dying and rising god. It's pretty incredible. And then there was a bilingual inscription that was found in Malta, where in the Phoenician side, they talked about Melkart, and in the Greek side, it talked about Heracles, or in Latin would be Hercules. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding, right? So, and you start to see these motifs that come out. He's a hero. He's, the son of some other god, perhaps, or he is that same god. It depends on the actual tradition. But when he says, take up this lamentation for the king of Tyre, he's talking about Melkart. And Melkart, I won't bore you guys with all of the details, but I got into just, tracing these things back. They all go back to Enlil. And Enlil is what in Isaiah 14, the other passage, it talks about Satan or Lucifer, has the Hebrew Halel. And a friend of mine wrote a paper a number of years ago saying that Halel is almost certainly Enlil in Sumerian and Elil in Akkadian. And as I mentioned, that Elil and the Elilim, the idols, are almost certainly the same word, the same root. So we start seeing these connections, right? And it's really exciting. Enlil was known as the Great Mountain. He was known as the Great Dragon. All right, does that ring any bells? I mean, Revelation says the Great Dragon right there, right? I mean, that is, right on the nose, telling us that is the Great Dragon. Why was John using these motifs of Satan? Why call him a great dragon if he's not a dragon? And yet, John obviously was being guided by the Holy Spirit, because people did not know about ancient Sumer in John's day. They had no idea. So this is coming from the Holy Spirit, who's telling us about what was buried under the ground of Satan, who was known as the Great Dragon in ancient Sumer. It's incredibly exciting. So that's just a few things to think about.
So, but you go into detail of just the description. I like, well, he was filled to the brim. Mm-hmm. Nothing more could be added to him of Yah's creation. And you speak, I think, in good detail of exactly what transpired about in his fall. In your words, what does that mean?
Right. Yeah. So that same passage there in Ezekiel 28, where it's talking about Melkart, this is talking about the anointed cherub, the cherub who covers, and God created him just like I said, absolutely filled to the brim. Like he was full of wisdom. That doesn't mean that he was, 95% full. He was 100% full. When it talks about that he was perfect in beauty, it doesn't mean that he was, pretty good looking. It means he was absolutely perfectly good looking. So you cannot improve upon something that is perfect. If you can improve upon perfection, then it wasn't perfect. But it says that he was perfect. And it says that, so, and he was, the other word there is that he was the standard of perfection, right? So if you think about a meter stick or yardstick, like that is what you use to measure other things. You measure other things against that standard. So Satan becomes the standard of perfection, wisdom, and beauty. I mean, wow, in just 6 Hebrew words, God gives such a description of who this being was. And he says, you were in Eden, you were on the mountain of God, you walked among the fiery stones until iniquity was found in your heart, and your heart became lifted up because of your beauty, and you corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your beauty. And then there's a really interesting word there. It's the word rechulatra, which is often translated as your tradings, right? You were filled, you sinned because of your tradings. And, it's like, wait a second. Who was Satan trading with? Was he trading with other angels? Were they hawking angel phones or something? And
Right.
and then God comes along, hey, quit selling stuff. I mean,
right, exactly.
Right. Yeah. So it doesn't make sense. But that same root is related to the word rachal, which means to slander. And we see in Proverbs that you should not go around as a slanderer, a rakil. So it's the same word. So instead of translating it by the abundance of your tradings, we could equally translate it by the abundance of your slanderings and not do violence to the text. I think it fits much better, and there's all kinds of evidence. And then on top of that, what we find is when we take that word rakil and we translate the thought into Greek, we come up with the word diabolos, which means to slander, right? So the Greek title for this being supports this idea that he is a slanderer. And even Satan, it could have that meaning. That's probably not its primary meaning, but that could be one of its meanings. But certainly devil has this idea of a slanderer. So Satan's sin, his iniquity, and there was a lot of it, it was by the abundance of your slandering. So we see that God was gracious with him even back then, is that he began to slander God. Where did he slander God? Well, certainly in the garden, he was slandering God. Did God really say? All right. And that apparently was not the first time that he started talking smack about God. He probably, maybe was going to the other angels, hey, do you really think we should be serving Adam or something?
Well, we know later that he must have, because there's a whole contingent of people who had, which we'll get to. We'll get to that.
Yeah.
But.
Right. Yeah. So what really is his iniquity? What caused him to fall off the edge? When you think about what God had put him in charge of, it says that he defiled his sanctuaries. Well, what are those? What are sanctuaries? When we look at the word Garden of Eden, the Hebrew word is gan, and a gan is an enclosed area. It's a protected space. And clearly in Ezekiel 28, he says that you were in Eden, the garden of God, right? So who else was in Eden? Well, Adam and Eve, obviously. So Satan was put in charge of this place. He was God's prime minister, his vizier. He was the guy that was supposed to take charge of everything. Think about Joseph and Pharaoh. Pharaoh says, you're going to be the number one dude. Only in regard to this throne am I higher than you. Otherwise, you're in charge. Now, the moment Pharaoh had a son, his son would outrank Joseph, right? Because then he would become the heir to the throne. But that would not change Joseph's job. Joseph would still do his job. He'd still have all this authority. He could speak in the name of Pharaoh, etc. And that was essentially the job that God had given to Satan, that you are the one that God's like, here's all my creation. You're the chief steward. Everything's under your control. You're supposed to take charge of this. You're not the heir, but you are the chief steward. And I think quite simply what happened is he saw little Adam, right? Adam is the heir because God gave all the dominion to Adam. And Satan probably just thought, if I trip him and he falls and kills himself, then I inherit all things, right? And that is the very parable that Jesus told when he leased out his land to these farmers. And then when it was time to collect, he sent a few servants, they killed them. And then he sent his own son and they killed him. And they said, look, this is the heir. If we kill him, we will inherit this. And I think that's the same principle that Satan was operating on, that if he can, quote unquote, kill or, mess things up for Adam, but he did kill him a little slowly, but he killed him eventually, that all of the dominion of earth would fall to Satan. And we see that so clearly when Jesus comes around and Satan takes him to the three places, right? Changes bread or this rock into bread. They go on top of the temple. That doesn't work. And then he takes him to a very high mountain. He says, look, all of this has been delivered to me. Why was it delivered to him? How did it go from Adam to Satan? Well, when Adam listened to Satan, he got hoodwinked. He was robbed, and Satan sort of got it. He cheated him fair and square, you might say. And so Adam forfeited his dominion over the planet. And that is the reason why Satan has been successful. It's not that he's more powerful than God, not at all. And when Jesus comes along, it's not that he's more powerful than Jesus. It's about authority. And that is how he plans to win. Now, looking forward to when the Antichrist comes, how is he going to be so arrogant and blasphemous and blaspheme God and those who dwell in heaven? How will he do that and think that he has any impunity at all? The reason is that he will have authority once again. We see that in Isaiah 28, where it says that the mockers in Jerusalem are going to make a covenant with death and with Sheol. And that covenant is going to give the Antichrist the authority that he needs to then spit in God's face, to really get out there and say, well, you made a covenant with death. Guess what? It's until death do us part. And only calling out on Jesus will that finally be annulled. So going back to the ancient day, Satan was in control because he got the authority over the planet. And people ask, well, why couldn't God just smite Satan right then and there? Why couldn't Jesus just go to the cross immediately? Because Satan's not an idiot. That's why, right? He hoodwinked our ancestors, Adam and Eve, to giving him the keys to the kingdom. He's like, hey, give me those keys, will you? And they're like, oh, these keys, and they give them to him. And then he thrusts them through with his sword. I'm speaking allegorically here, but metaphorically, but this is what happened, is that they gave him the keys to the planet, and then he wasn't going to give them back. And even though God is more powerful, infinitely more powerful than Satan, there's such a thing as free will. There's such a thing as laws, justice, and God is not going to violate those, even though Satan was quite the schemer. So the only way to overcome this is to send the Messiah. And that's where God says that he will send the, there's going to be enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. He will crush your head and you will strike his heel. Now, if you're Satan and you have this prophecy of doom hanging over your head, what are you going to be thinking about most of the time? You're thinking about how some guy is predicted to come and squash your head. So you're going to take preventative measures to see that this does not happen. And one of the first things we see was in the coming of the Nephilim. So what's really exciting in my research is that I discovered that the inscription that was found on top of Mount Hermon was written directly by Satan. Not that he etched it, but he gave the command.
We're gonna get to that. Don't jump ahead. We'll spend some time on that.
Okay. All right.
There is a section. I don't know whether it's still in the same place. You talk about Hasatan, Enlil being cast to the ground. So that happened when and where? When and where? This casting down.
Yes.
What are we talking about?
Okay. Well, I would pair Isaiah 14, Ezekiel 28, and Genesis 3 all as one and the same event from different perspectives. Just like we might have, a car chase and then it explodes at the end and you've got this camera over here and you got this one over here and they're all giving you the same car explosion, but from different camera angles. And so we have 3 different authors who are giving us different angles of this event. One is telling us, oh, Lucifer or Halel, how you were cast to the ground, right? You are the one who said in your heart that you're going to do all these things. So that's one, giving us sort of his inside his brain type perspective. Here's the motivations you had. And then Ezekiel 28 is really God's perspective. Hey, I created you perfect. You were awesome until you had this terrible sin in your heart. You slandered, etc. And so I cast you to the ground. And then in Genesis chapter 3, we see the actual fait accompli. We see this actually being done where God says, okay, because you did this, you're now more cursed than all the other creatures and you will slither on your belly. And so I would suggest that those are all the same event. I do not subscribe to this idea that there was a pre-Adamic fall. That's just not in Scripture. I know it's popular with some people, but it's just not in Scripture. So why teach that?
So when did this take place? Did it happen there? Are we talking about something that some people hold this to still be as a future event because of some of the words that are used in Revelation? So did this take place in the past? Did it take place when Yeshua was crucified and then resurrected? Is it something still yet to happen? What do you hold in regards to this?
Yeah, well, I definitely see that he was cast to the ground there in the garden, right? Okay. So just as it says in Genesis chapter 3 that he cast him to the earth, that I think those are the same thing. Now, having said that, I mean, that does not preclude that there will still be other, or there will not be there. Let me just say this: there will be a finality to that judgment, right? So what began in the garden will be completed by the time Satan is finally done away with.
So he was cast, but the whole, I guess you could say, outcome of that casting out is still ongoing.
Yes, exactly. Because what did he lose? Let's think about what he lost. When Satan sinned, he lost his glorious fire. We know this from Ezekiel chapter 28. He says, I caused fire to come out from within you. He says, Otzi esh mi tochacha. All right, so I took the fire out from within you. What fire are we talking about? When we look in Ezekiel chapter 1, we see there are these other kruvim, these other cherubim, and they're these fiery beings, right? They've got fire this way and that way and electricity and all this stuff. They're pretty amazing. Satan was among that group. He was of that order, and he lost that fire, this energy that was radiating. And who was the source of that? God was the source. So we might think of it like God says, I'm unplugging you, okay? And from now on, you're going to run on batteries. You're basically running on batteries. And I think that's essentially what it was. And the same with Adam and Eve. Before they sinned, they were plugged into God. And then after they sinned, they're running on batteries. How do we recharge our batteries? We eat food. That's how we literally recharge our batteries. But we know that every battery has only so many recharges in it, right? Until finally it's no good. And currently our battery life is, 80 years, 90, 100, something like that. With Adam, it was lasted 930 years. So it's a pretty good battery, but it still died. It eventually died.
Near the event horizon. And
yes, exactly. Right. And so for Satan, he has a battery too. But what food does he have at his disposal? He's not made of dirt, right? So he cannot eat things of the dirt. He is of a different nature, it's a spiritual nature. So he needs a food of a spiritual nature. And that food is blood. You're like, wait, that sounds awfully nature, right? Natural. But God says that the life is in the blood. You're not supposed to eat the blood. There's something about it. It's more than simply hemoglobin. There's the essence of the life is in that blood. And this is why Satan and his crew like to consume blood, because this is how they're recharging their batteries. And I didn't want to go into too much detail in the book because it's very dark, but basically, you hear about things where people do some very sadistic type of seances and occult practices, and the victim, the more negative energy of fear, etc., that they have, then the tastier that is for the demons, the more energy they derive from that. So this whole thing is Satan's way of replenishing his energy. And I think we see various examples of this. We see it in abortion. We see it in wars. We see it in murders. Anytime there is some kind of a shedding of blood, not just natural death, but a shedding of blood, man to man, right? That is absolutely one of the sins. We see that that's in the Noahide laws. You're not supposed to do it. Obviously, it's in the Ten Commandments, etc. So this is something that's very terrible. And what's interesting about it is, remember when Cain killed his brother Abel, that God said his blood cries out from the ground. And you're like, wait, can blood talk? I mean, I didn't know that blood could talk. Like, I don't hear anything. But apparently it has some kind of message that it gives out. It probably doesn't speak like a person speaks, but there's some kind of a frequency. Is there something about that? There's some kind of energy coming from that. What is that energy? I would suggest that is related to the life force. And when it's spilled, that is what the demons get to feast on. So that's one way for them to overcome this little problem that they have.
This wasn't the only result of the fall, of his corruption and his being cast out. You have a chapter in here that says Satan caused the two realms.
Yes.
So there's more explanation to be done here. What do you mean? Satan caused the two realms? Talk to me.
Well, it's interesting in the Sumerian literature. It talks about how there was a time when heaven spoke to earth and earth spoke to heaven, and the entity that was responsible for splitting these two realms was Enlil, or Satan. So what does that mean? I mean, you have heaven and earth talking to each other. Well,
right.
If we
that immediately puts me in mind of the passage which says, at the garden, the two angels were set with fiery swords so that they may not pass into where?
Right.
So, okay. I don't remember anybody talking about here upon the earth, two angels standing with fiery swords. So I have a kind of two, similar thoughts to that. My first thought is that in fact it does still exist. I guess it's relatable, maybe part of the same thought. But again, it goes to that thought being so far removed from that time that we are, because of this, more, another way to put it, more in the natural, in the fleshly realm, so that our spiritual ability to see, I don't know what words to use here.
Yeah.
Perhaps it's there. We simply cannot see it because our eyes are so dim today.
Yep.
That we're not able to view it. Versus perhaps closer to the event where the spiritual sense was more attuned still to what was our natural existence and state, that it was visible still then. I don't know.
Well,
your thoughts are on that, but go ahead.
Well, what I would suggest is that we cannot see it. And now, what's interesting is that various prophets throughout the Bible were able to see through that veil. So Ezekiel, when he's sitting by the river Chebar with the captives of Judah, it says that the heavens were opened and he saw into heaven, right? So he saw into the other realm. So the windows of heaven, or the heavens were open. When Stephen was being stoned, he saw the heavens open. At the baptism of Jesus, the heavens were opened. In Revelation chapter 19, John says, I saw the heavens open. So those are 4 very clear passages where it says that the heavens will open. And what we see is that the heavens are going to recede like a scroll at the return of Jesus. So that tells us that it's called a veil. In Isaiah chapter 25, it talks about the veil that covers all people. In Isaiah 64, the prophet says, oh, that you would rend the heavens and come down. What is he talking about? I mean, is there some thing that he's going to pass away? Do the stars move to this side and the sun moves to this side and here comes Jesus? Or is there some kind of a veil, a filter, a membrane that we cannot see?
That's exactly what it seems to make to me more sense, that there is a coexistence of the spiritual and the physical.
Mm-hmm.
But the ability to perceive each realm and thereby operate in a functional way in either has been limited to man.
Yeah.
And that the mechanics of what that means is lost to us, of course.
Yep.
And I think that that door has been closed by the Father for a purpose with a reason. Now, I think that there are still ways, because that's our original place of origin, our original place of habitation, what is to be our natural place of residence again, that there are means by bypassing the security system, if you
if you so choose.
If you so choose. But there's a law against this. Set in place by the Father. So any unnatural recursion or recursion by any other means except by the one we've been given is a violation of the law.
Right.
And there's a consequence to that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so and it's not so much that we belong there, it's that the 2 realms used to be together. Right. Okay. So I use a Feynman diagram where I have these 2 concentric circles and then they intersect. Okay. So in that diagram, you see that you have heaven and you have earth, or you have the spiritual domain and you have the earthly domain. And back in the beginning, they were superimposed on each other. And then after the fall is when they separated. So at the return of Jesus, they're going to become one again. That's why it talks about the sky receding like a scroll, because that veil that we don't see, we don't know what it is. I would think of it kind of like some kind of a force field, but it is going to go away. And then we are going to see everything that is in the natural realm, or in the spiritual realm. And then that spiritual realm will then will then impose itself on this physical realm, so that the 2 become one again. And it's going to be explosive when that happens. It says, the day of the Lord so comes as a thief in the night, in which the heavens will pass away and the elements will melt with fervent heat. 2 Peter 3:10. So that is when that veil goes away, that the heavens will pass away. Again, it's not the sun, moon, and stars ever going away. We know those are not going away because it says so in Psalm 148, that God created them and he established them forever. And so they are going to stick around. God says in Jeremiah 31, if these ordinances ever depart from before me, then I will forsake Israel. Right. So clearly he's not going to forsake those ordinances. The sun, moon, and stars will always be there. And so it's the veil that we're talking about. Again, the veil, force field, whatever you want to call it, this membrane that limits communication and passage between these 2 is going to disappear. But right now, I would suggest that it is actually protecting us from God, and it seems to be limiting the the demons or fallen angels' ability to come into this realm. Now, they can get around it. There are ways. You can do it through a seance. You can do it through some kind of a blood human sacrifice or various other seances or occult practices. Very bad idea. You can also do it through drugs. I read this book years ago called The Way of the Shaman. And I was like, wow, this is pretty amazing. This guy took ayahuasca and he, came near to death, but didn't die, obviously. And in his vision, he saw these kind of look like stars falling from heaven to earth. And they were these beings that came and said, we came here to escape our enemy. And we're the real rulers of the planet. And so this guy came out of his vision, his trance, and he went to the local priest and or the local missionary and explained all that he saw. And it's like, yeah, they always say that, because that's the reality. And, I'm kind of like shouting at this book. I'm like, that's because they're demons. And that's what it says in Revelation chapter 12. That's exactly what it says. And so there are ways to bypass that, but it's a very, very bad idea. Incredibly dangerous if you go that route. Don't go that way. All right. You can do it, but you'll regret it. So don't do that.
It comes with a very, very high cost and perhaps unreparable damage to any future that you could have had to your
Right.
soul.
Right.
Don't do it. Do not.
Bad idea.
Bad idea.
So
now we don't have a lot of time left, Doug. And so go ahead, finish your thought. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, so another part of Satan's problem is that he's now limited in this world. And so I believe that is one of the reasons that he wanted the Nephilim, was to create kind of a biological bodysuit so that he could have some free reign in this realm.
Well, that's then a perfect segue to the point I wanted to get to then. You talk about, and we've heard about this, those who have read or been in our circle, for the last decade have more so in the last 5 years probably than any time before the previous 5 years. But in the last 5 years, there has been many authors, many people within our circles that have spoken about this epitaph that was found at the top of Mount Hermon. However, and I'm going to give you the credit for this, you go into far more detail than any of these others have with your Hebrew knowledge of the Hebrew language and Semitic languages. You go in and break exactly what was written on this epitaph. You break this down. You spend a lot of time doing so. So if you would give us that grace and mercy,
Sure.
In the shorter version of it and what you've done in your book, break that down for us, exactly what it was said, what it means. Give us to the bare bones of exactly what was proclaimed there.
Absolutely. So in the 1860s, a guy named Charles Warren found on top of Mount Hermon, he found an inscription. Wow. And on the inscription, the way he translated it is it says, according to the command of the great and holy God, those taking an oath proceed from here. And, I was like, okay, that's interesting. And then another scholar out of Harvard, George Nicholsburg, translated it the same thing. And then he brought to our attention that it seems to be related to the text in First Enoch. And, so I read their translation. I was like, well, that, it sounds legit. I'm quite inquisitive and I want to see it for myself. I guess I'm a doubter. So I want to see what does the original actually say. And I found it on the British Museum website. And so I, started looking at this, and it's in what's called mayuscules, which is, they're all capital letters, right? So I looked at this, and there's no spaces between the letters. It's just one run-on word, right? So I was able to and
that was the way it was done then. Sure.
Right. And so I was able to make out, some of the words were really easy. And then I got to two words. And I'm like, wait, what are these two words? Now, the way that Nicholsburg and Warren translated it was and holy. And I thought, wait a second, I do not see that in the original. I found the words bo and batiu. And I'm like, I finally traced bo to probably related to bovine, to an ox. So that was a prefix. So that one it was tricky, but not too bad. But this other one, batiu, I'm like, what in the world is this word? And I looked everywhere I could think, every lexicon I could get my hands on, trying to figure out if anybody knew what this word was. It's just not a Greek word. And yet it's written, it looks like it's Greek, but it's not a Greek word. The ending is definitely Greek, but the beginning, B-A-T, is not at all. So I looked and looked, and I finally found this word in the nominative is the word batios, and I found it in Messapia. So Messapia is in southern Italy, kind of in the Boot area, and this was an epithet for Zeus, and it was found in these grottos, in these caves that mariners had inscribed. And I'm like, what in the world is this word doing in a grotto in southern Italy between 800 BC and about maybe 300 BC? And this doesn't make any sense. And so as I continued to do more research on this, I discovered that the inscriptions in those caves were written by sailors who were Semitic. I'm like, oh, okay. So Semitic sailors, those are Phoenicians, right? The Phoenicians were world famous for their sailing. And of course they were Semitic, right? They spoke a Semitic language, Phoenician and Semitic. And, and so I just kept, pressing on, and I was able to connect the dots, and I discovered that this is the same word. Now, what's interesting is the people in Italy were saying, well, this is some kind of a title, some local title for Zeus. Now, if you think of some of the local epithets or titles that the various gods had, like if you have Baal of Hermon, right? Then it's the Baal who's related to Hermon, right? So that makes sense. So there's a geographical location. But in this area of Messapia, there was no little village or anything on the map called Batios. So I thought, okay, this cannot be a local epithet for Zeus. Everybody knows who Zeus is. So it's not something that's local, but it was brought there by these Phoenician sailors who in their backyard have Mount Hermon. And so I was able to make that connection, but then I'm like, but what does it mean? I still couldn't figure out what it meant. And so I had to go deep into Sumerian, and it was pretty crazy. I'm trying to give you the short version, but yeah. So in Sumerian, if you've ever seen Sumerian, it looks like chicken scratch, right? It looks like literally they would take a stick and they would press it in soft clay, and that's how they would make their writings. And so for the god Enlil, it was basically two sticks facing each other in kind of a triangle at this end and a triangle at this end, right? So they're facing each other. So that's the symbol for Enlil. And the way it's called a logogram. That's what it's called. And this logogram, the name of this logogram is B-A-D, bad or bad, or bat or be. And I was like, okay, that's really interesting. So I was reading this paper by Amar Anus out of Finland, and he was saying that there was a conscious syncretism between Enlil and Dagon. So a syncretism means that they're the exact same god, but just different names, right? So, in this part of the world, they call him this, and in this part of the world, they call him that, but it's the same entity that we're talking about. So what we find then is that they both had the same logogram. And even Ninurta, son of Enlil, so this is a derivation of this god Enlil, he had also that same thing. And then I discovered more that Bad can also mean death. It's related to death gods. It's related to Og, king of Bashan. And so long story short, I've discovered that that Bad or Bat was the core word of Batios. And so on that inscription, we have the name of Satan, right? This is the logogram name of Satan on that. And then the eos ending is simply a people or place ending that tells you we're talking about a people or a person in this case. So it's really groundbreaking to discover that the people who put this on this inscription, they didn't matter to them if they were talking about Enlil or Dagon or Baal or Melkart. They understood that all of those gods were one and the same. That's what's amazing about it. Now, it's kind of ironic that in English, it's bad, right? Bad. Well, it's fitting, right? He is bad. And it's kind of ironic. I don't know what to make of that, but
I don't think it's ironic at all. I think at all. There are a number of English words that survive and actually mean closer to the original than the middle grounds by which they came about.
Right. Yeah.
Good being one of them. Anyway.
Yeah.
The opposite of it. Good is actually interesting. I talk about that in my book, but go ahead.
Yeah. So there we have, and so what I was able to translate is that according to the command of the great bull god, the great ox god. So one of the characteristics of, or the icons of Enlil or Baal was that he was a bull. We also know that Molech, who is the same guy, Molech was also considered to be a bull. And we have in later literature, it talks about how they would offer children, sadly, in this burnt offering, and to this half man, half bull. The torso, and to the head was a bull, and it had its arms extended out like this, and then it was raging hot, and then they would place the child in the hands, which is absolutely terrible. But this is the same thing, right? It's the same God. So they all have this similar. Not all of them are necessarily indicated by Bod, but they're all related. And many of them do actually have this same logogram of Bod. Then I discovered that Amuru was the name of the Amorite god. He has the same logogram, right? I'm like, wait. So, this was a conscious syncretism. That means that the scribes understood that Enlil and Baal, or Enlil and Dagon, they're like, it's the same guy, so we don't need to write a different name. And probably what they were doing on this inscription is just saying, look, we're talking about the entity that's behind this logogram. That's the one that we're talking about. And we know that he has many names, and that's how he's been able to keep his identity obscured, and that you'll never find Lucifer in the ancient literature. But you will find Enlil and Baal and Dagon. They're all the same guy. They're all talking about Satan. And that logogram that was then transliterated into that inscription on top of Herman is really the proof that the command for the fallen angels, or for the angels to come down and take women, was given by Satan. And it says on that inscription that those going forth from here take an oath. So the name of the mountain is the oath, right? This is a indemnification. This is where they are they're cursing themselves if they don't follow through with what they're promising to do. So that's the name of the mountain. Hermon, Herem, means to curse, to take an oath. And in this case, they're cursing themselves, saying that, we're going to do it, by golly, we promise we're going to do it. And if we don't, then we're cursing ourselves. And it's had that name for a very, very long time. But wait, there's more, right? So it gets even crazier, because this same place is in the backyard of Bashan. We know that Og was king of the Bashan, and I traced the word Bashan back to Akkadian, which is Bashmu, and Bashmu means the snake dragon. And then I did a little collaboration with Derek Gilbert, and I discovered that there was it was like a 1 kilometer long snake geoglyph on down by the Gilgal Rephaim, right? So there's this snake that's etched in the ground. It's 1 kilometer long. It's crazy. And so this land was known as the land of the snake dragon. And the snake dragon, who does that remind us of, right? Well, the snake, the serpent, back in Genesis chapter 3, the dragon in Revelation, the great dragon. These are all symbols, icons, epithets for Satan. And it's just riddled with it. The literature, the land, it's all pointing us to this. This was Satan who was behind all of these things. And he's the one who gave the command to the angels to come down and to take women to create the Nephilim.
So sum up for us then, in the words of your translation, exactly what the epithet would read in this better translation.
Yeah. So let me just I'm going to pull it up so I can give you.
That's fine. That's fine. Take your time.
I'm just going to read it here because it is a little bit technical. But so the translation then is according to the command of the great bull god Batios, which is Bad, right, or Bat. Those swearing an oath in this place go forth, right? And whereas Warren and Nicholsburg said according to the command of the great and holy God, those taking an oath proceed from here. But again, it wasn't the holy God that told the angels to be naughty. It was the other guy. It was the bad guy, right? It was literally the bad guy who told those angels to go down there and do that. The God in heaven, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, would never tell them to do that because that was transgressing their role, their position, and what God had in store for them to do. So they knew that they were sinning when they went and did this. And I actually suggest that the angels that did this were not yet fallen. They were being seduced by Satan, and they fell for his seduction. And they came down and they had relations with women, and we know the rest is history.
I would agree. It was the oath itself lends to a decision being made then to follow through, because otherwise, he would have already had the control. He would have just been said, "Hey, you're my guys. This is what you're going to do." Mm-hmm. The fact that took place then means that it was at that time. So we're talking thousands of years after Eden that they chose at that time to make that decision in doing this. And
we know eventually that there will be.
It's a remarkable thing to consider when you think of what has transpired before, that there is an ongoing trade between the adversary and creation, God's creation, both of the likeness of angels and man, that has been taking place. I think we like to, in our minds, set in stone it that this happened at that time and then it's done. But no, this is an ongoing, transpiring war that has taken place even today, and that there are great things at stake for what's to take place in yet the future.
Yes, absolutely. So,
we've actually run out of our time here tonight, Doug. So I'm going to ask you just a couple more questions. The first one, literally anybody watching this show, if you don't know where Doug is, his website or whatever, you're not trying. But I'll give you the opportunity here to tell us anyway. Where should people find you?
Okay. So they can go to douglashamp.com. That is where all of my personal research is. If you're interested in our congregation, which is in Lakewood, Colorado, we are at thewaycongregation.com, and we're on 2nd Avenue in Lakewood if you want to come check us out every Shabbat. We'd love to have you join us. It's a lot of fun.
The second one, this book is not out yet. It's undergoing its final revisions. It doesn't even have a cover yet. I tried to get it and failed because he doesn't have that ready. What is your expected release day or date or thereabouts for this book?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I'm hoping that I can have something in people's hands in the next 2 months. That's my
2
goal.
months. So we're perhaps by the end of February, we should be able to get our hands on this book. I will definitely let you know because Doug has promised to get me a copy, and I will be with joy sharing that I have that in my hands. So if you're following me on Facebook or social media, I'll be letting you know when I got that in my happy little hands. Doug, as a friend and brother, thank you for letting me have the opportunity to interview about this. I just want to reiterate of just some of the topics that we have gone here tonight, having the opportunity to read the first full draft of the book. I really appreciate the ability to have research to go with the information in a way that you can relay to others who may not be so sure, or they want to understand the stuff, but they themselves, if you talk about doing research and going into origin stuff, you can readily see the eyes glaze over and the mind just immediately shuts off. This is going to be a great gift to put in the hands of anybody that gives you deep yet concise information of research that they can consume and read and give them a good understanding, a better understanding than perhaps finding it here, there, and everywhere for this. It's going to be in my library. It's going to be a great resource, a great study tool. It's going to, I'm sure, lend itself to helping me relay other passages and research in the future. But you'll want to get this book and for yourself and to share with others. So we're excited about that. And I thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
You've already closed. There's going to be a part 3. So that invitation is already outstanding. We'll have you on for that as well. Thank you, Doug, for joining us on Disputed Lands here tonight. It's been an enjoyable time. It's gone quickly as usual. And until we have you on again the next time, thanks for coming and joining us tonight.
Thank you.
This has been Disputed Lands. My name is, of course, Chad SCHAFER. This is Take on the World TV. We love you guys. And till the next one, it'll be next year. And we'll see what comes. Until then, shalom.
Shalom.
Get right, get inside, get hungry, word of God appetite. Everlasting water, never again thirsty. To disputed lands, take a journey. Get right, get inside, get hungry, word of God appetite. Everlasting water, never again thirsty. To disputed lands, take a journey. Get right, get inside, get hungry, word of God appetite.